Okay, excellent. Well, welcome everyone to this IAQM webinar, Climate Change from the Air Quality Perspective. We're delighted to be joined by two expert speakers today and also our chair, Jamie Clayton, who I'll introduce in a second, just after I've done some quick housekeeping. So after all the presentations, we'll hear from both of our speakers first, and you'll then have the opportunity to ask questions. And you can submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation. And the chair will then read these out on your behalf later on during the Q&A. If you want to pose questions to a particular person, please do put their name in the question. And just so you all know, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the the IES YouTube channel and the IAQM website. Thank you so much for logging in. I'll now introduce our chair, Jamie Clayton. So Jamie is a technical director in the air quality team at Bureau Veritas. Initially focused on the modelling side of air quality, he has found himself increasingly drawn to monitoring as his career has progressed. Jamie is keen to explore how we can communicate the subject of air quality more effectively so it is better understood by a wider audience. Jamie is also a member of the IAQM Climate Change Working Group, which has organised this webinar. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Ethny. For that nice introduction. This webinar, I think, has come about the sort of group that came together to look at air quality and climate change. I think, the way the webinar came about was a realization that this is an area that's growing at the minute. It's an area that we don't have all the answers at the minute. And therefore, to just give a bit of the framing of this webinar, it is very much these are observations that we've had. These are possible solutions and possible ways of doing things in both a legislative context from Richard and then a more practical context from Kathryn. But very much we don't have all the answers today. This is the start of a discussion and a debate. So please do ask any questions. And if at the end of the webinar you're thinking there are useful contributions I could give to the Climate Change and Air Quality Working Group through the IAQM, please do get in touch and please do join, because we need to hear voices and we need to hear, everyone is going to be at different levels of this. For myself, I didn't realise what I knew until I started talking to other people. So yeah, please do interact and get in touch if you think you've got something useful to say after today. I think for me, there's just one point which is I find slightly amusing, is that I've been in the air quality industry probably over 10, 12 years now. And at every sort of social gathering with non-air quality people that I've gone to, and I've been asked that awkward question of what do you do? And I've responded that I'm an air quality consultant. At that point, the person talking to me then goes, oh yeah, like climate change, and starts talking about what they know about climate change and Greta Thunberg. And I've always had to correct them and say, no, actually, it's about NO2 and PM10 and that sort of thing. And there's some amusement that after all that time, I've realised, in fact, it was them that was right. And it was just that us as the air quality discipline had to catch up and realise where we need to start thinking about climate change more as well. So yeah, there is a level of amusement for me in that regard. So moving on to our speakers then. So I think Richard will be up first, presenting more of a legislative context of air quality and climate change, how they're coming together, how things are different, and how the air quality assessment is a lot more established by ourselves over the last sort of 10, 15 years than the climate change, which is sort of rapidly evolving, growing, and people are working out what to do and then how our assessments link to it. And then Kathryn, I think, will be coming from a sort of hands-on examples of where the two have collided in her experience, and then possibly proposing some solutions as well. So I will introduce Richard, and then we'll move on to Kathryn. Once we've had both speakers, we will then have sort of an open question and answer session for about 20 minutes at the end. So Richard Maggs is our Head of Environment and Sustainability at Bureau Veritas. He has over 25 years experience in environmental quality, specialising in air pollution. He sits on the Air Quality Expert Group and has been expert witness for planning inquiries, judicial reviews and civil litigation. So Richard, I will hand over to yourself. I can see you're sharing your screen already. So yeah, feel free to kick off now, Richard.
Great, thank you, Jamie, and thanks everybody for attending today. Actually, some very nice introductions from everybody. I suppose, as Jamie has said, actually sort of this is part of IAQM deliberations with regards to climate change. And I suppose actually I come from a lifelong career within the air quality community. So I suppose I'm here to really sort of help share my thoughts, knowing actually sort of climate change concerns are very much at the forefront of everybody's concern today, both from a society point of view, but also maybe sort of increasingly from a professional point of view. What I'm going to cover in my short presentation is actually just sort of some of the known interactions between climate change and air quality and the overlay that we know exists currently. Clearly, we can't do a climate change and air quality seminar without sort of touching on net zero pathways and the routes that sort of organisations and the country is following. And then perhaps of more relevance actually for us as air quality professionals, particularly with regards to planning and development, where we sit in climate change assessment and how we go about the appraisal of proposed development opportunities and what we mean by sort of the outcome of those assessments from a planning perspective to help inform decisions made on whether to consent to development or not. What I will do is sort of stray into the challenges as I see they currently exist, and also maybe look more widely with regards to some of the opportunities elsewhere where guidance does exist that might help inform the approach that we take as air quality professionals. So I think we're all very familiar as air quality professionals that there are synergies and conflicts between air quality and climate change. And actually, so this is nicely mapped out and summarised in a document in the public domain issued by the Air Quality Expert Group, having held a workshop with DEFRA back in January 2020. The group with other professionals actually and DEFRA and notable government departments involved in the net zero pathway looked at the strategy as it stands then with regards to the route for 5 different pollutant species, ozone, particulate, NOx, volatile organics and ammonia, which are primary sort of national emission ceiling directive pollutants of interest. They looked at qualitatively the sort of direction of travel with regards to positive, neutral or negative impacts on the various sort of routes to net zero contained within the government strategy, varying from road and rail transport, fleet decarbonisation, through to food production and agricultural productivity, down to forestry, biocrops and biogenic emissions, obviously looking at the wholesale adoption potentially of hydrogen as an alternative fuel source and carbon capture and storage and building energy efficiency. So it was quite a comprehensive workshop and actually generally I think that the summation of all of those considerations generally highlights that actually in the majority there is positive or neutral outcomes between climate change strategies and the impacts on air quality. There are some negative ones, of course, and actually they were largely deemed to be associated with increased biogenic volatile organics and ammonia and the secondary pollutants rather than the primary pollutants. It was established actually in that workshop that the net benefits to air quality are not always directly linear and actually with regards to the secondary pollutants, some of the benefits of the net zero pathways might not be realised right to the end of the current plan, so near 2050, rather than immediate gains in improvements in air quality. So for anybody connecting with this, actually, it's a very useful document, and actually sets the scene quite nicely with regards to the net zero pathway that the government is currently following, and also the interactions between climate change pollutants and our local air quality pollutants. The Committee on Climate Change actually, in its 6th carbon budget, released in December 2020, readily acknowledges that local authorities who are at the forefront of planning decisions have a role to play in this. However, it cautioned against the lack of coordination around local authority endeavours to contribute to net zero pathways. And actually at the moment, or actually then in December 2020, certainly recognised that local authorities were making contract decisions and purchasing decisions that would lock in emissions beyond the current 2020 timescale to which the budget was looking at. Therefore, there's very much a fragmentation with regards to local authority endeavours. And actually, whilst local authorities have indeed declared climate change emergencies, each one of those action plans is quite individual to the local authority. It forms a good basis of trying to achieve net zero, but actually there will be some inconsistency across local authorities. And certainly the Committee of Climate Change sought to try and provide some continuity across all those endeavours. The diagram on the right-hand side is actually developed from the Internal Centre for Sustainability. It's called an onion diagram. We don't necessarily need to know the detail, but actually sort of this sets out how local authorities control emissions within their area, from direct controls on buildings and operations, travel, through to forming partnerships and showcasing. From a planning and development perspective, obviously we know planning authorities at the local authority level have a critical role in terms of shaping the environment that we live in, and also the planning decisions that are going to be made. As air quality professionals, we're very much used to, and I think are quite comfortable within our world of appraising the impact of development proposals against the baseline. We establish a baseline, we do the assessment of that intervention with regards to the actual development proposal itself. That can vary, of course, in terms of sort of its footprint, but actually can lead to a positive impact or a negative impact on the metrics that are being assessed. Obviously, our comparison with regards to that is all done against the counterfactual, the development not taking place, and actually there's some degree of significance with regards to ultimately changes in pollutant concentrations that does arise or is predicted to arise from the development proposals against the baseline are attributed through a well-known significance matrix that most of us adopt as air quality professionals. That works at a local level, but actually arguably with regards to climate change, the scalability and opportunity to ascribe significance has some challenges laid out in front of it. And I'll just go into those now. Certainly, more people and organisations, NGOs, etc., are connected to climate change, and actually the phrase greenwashing is very much sort of a here and now phrase. With regards to that, actually development proposals are likely to be subject to greater scrutiny, both from a regulatory point of view, but also from a perception point of view for stakeholders. There's a very live planning inquiry at the moment that I'm sure everybody's aware of for the Marks and Spencer headquarter building on Oxford Street. The planning inquiry started yesterday and runs for 2 weeks. I think that that will be a very instrumental planning inquiry in terms of placing emphasis through environmental impact assessment on embodied carbon, and whether actually alternatives for builds actually result from repurposing of buildings rather than demolition and rebuild. And it's estimated, I think one of the criteria before that inquiry is actually the immediate release of something like 40,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide as a consequence of the demolition and rebuild materials of embodied carbon. So I see an increasing trend, possibly on the back of the inspector's report for that inquiry with regards to life cycle analysis. It's fair to say, possibly as air quality professionals, we're not close to the life cycle analysis. That's something actually maybe sort of more for those that have carbon colleagues have, or sustainability expertise starts to come to the fore. So actually as air quality professionals, maybe part of the drive going forward under climate change and air quality is for us to work more closely and in a more joined up way with our carbon experts and also our sustainability professionals. Landscape sequestration, obviously to some degree, this very much depends on the scale of the development, but obviously landscape proposals, planting arrangements, etc., can lead to carbon uptake when they are newly planted and established. It's fair to say that actually carbon uptake is going to be very minimal, but obviously development opportunities and proposals last typically upwards of sort of 50, 70, 80, 100 years. So maybe there's an opportunity there for us to put some numbers around that. Inevitably, in an EIA process, we're asked to take account of cumulative assessments, and that can be quite difficult from just a normal air quality perspective, but obviously then getting the right level of information from the perspective of climate change is equally very challenging. Benchmarks, we are from an air quality perspective very used to local benchmarks. The local air quality management regime does it almost exactly what it says on the tin. It's very much geared towards the local environment and local environmental quality. Obviously, we're very familiar with sort of distance criteria around the development and impacts decreasing as you move with greater distance away from development proposals from a local air quality perspective. But obviously from a climate change perspective, what is the scale on which you're reporting your emissions? Are you looking at local? Should we be looking at national? And obviously climate change is a global scale issue. I think by far one of the biggest challenges is actually ascribing significance to an assessment for which climate change and CO2 emissions is done on development proposals. What threshold of change at a local level or national level is acceptable or what's deemed inappropriate. I don't think actually as an industry we necessarily have a full handle with regards to what that means for us. And therefore it might be deemed appropriate to sort of look elsewhere with regards to where other sectors maybe sort of are guided by this. So actually in this regard, the government have recently made decisions around oil and gas licensing in the North Sea. For the moment anyway, they have accepted that actually the giving of new licenses is conducive to the Climate Change Act and the targets that are there. However, in due course, that might not remain the case for future, and therefore the oil and gas industry are working to checkpoints of compliance. I've sort of had a look at this and actually tried to sort of bring this down to perhaps how it might apply for us as air quality professionals relative to development proposals. Obviously, the scalability here is something that needs to be defined more appropriately. A small development proposal in authority X won't be the same, obviously, scale of CO2 emissions as a offshore North Sea installation. However, you know, the principles here might be able to be applied in any future guidance. So step one would be maybe to look at the historical performance of the sector. Here we're talking about sort of the built environment sector, I suppose, and how that's doing against the commitments for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. National atmospheric emissions inventory will help guide that approach, and that assessment could be done at both national and local scale, but also look at reviewing future trends. The second one would be to look at the operation of emissions versus benchmarks. And again here, development opportunities against good industry benchmarks. But again, what is good probably needs to be defined in a much more precise and coherent manner. Praise the impacts against the net zero pathway emissions, but also equally looking at the alternative appraisals, particularly where demolition of an existing building and repurposing of that, so taking on some of the observations around the Marks and Spencer public inquiry, potentially what that means with regards to reuse or redesign of existing buildings to avoid CO2 emissions associated with the embodied carbon of materials and the transportation of those materials that then takes place across the country or indeed the world, depending on the supply chain that's in place. There is increasingly a large amount of information for us to digest as air quality professionals. And actually here is an extract from carbon budgets allocated through the Tyndall Centre, the Climate Change Centre at the University of Manchester. This is just an example of a carbon budget from 2018 for Canterbury local authority. And sort of it sets the criteria there to the net zero pathway. Clearly development proposals have the opportunity to set back the local endeavours to reduce carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore maybe sort of significance criteria can either be based numerically on contributions to those specific carbon budgets, or maybe a consideration to the extent to which development proposals may set back the forward progress of emissions reduction. So again, there's different thoughts with regards to maybe how one would ascribe significance from a climate change perspective relative to local air quality management perspective. So I think in summary, climate change, we know, is a very live issue for us. Jamie said in his introduction that actually quite often as air quality professionals, we are misinterpreted as aligning ourselves to climate change. And I think if I had £1 for every time I entered into a discussion on climate change as an air quality professional, I think I'd be a very rich man and probably retired by now. However, it is something that I don't think as air quality professionals we can necessarily put our heads in the sand on, and something that I certainly welcome the Institute of Air Quality Management Working Group on Climate Change and Air Quality looking at. It's quite clear that we have good guidance available on air quality impact assessment, less so on climate change. And there are some other frameworks, as articulated through my presentation, that possibly enable us to start that process of looking at what future guidance might look like. So thank you very much, Jamie, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yeah, that was a great presentation, and yeah, really informative. I think for me, yeah, our industry is well established. A lot of the reports and assessments that we do, the format of which is well established, and you know the our mitigation measures that we're often putting in our assessments and reports are well established. And, you know, take, for instance, the mechanical ventilation aspect. That's something that we've got used to putting in reports. We're now going to have to think about that in a different way. And I think in a way that's a good, you know, it's good for us as an industry to have that refresh. But yeah, the consideration of it's not always just going to be about DEFRA anymore. It's you know, it's the other government departments as well that need consideration, and even in, you know, other international legislation. So yeah, I think bringing that all together, it is just emissions as well, but then at the same time, it's a different sort of emissions that need to be looked at in a different way, and whether we can distill that down to an impact descriptor box so easily is going to be the challenge, I think. So anyway, we'll move on. we won't delay any longer. So our next speaker is Kathryn Woolley. So Kathryn is an associate and London team lead in air quality at Hoare. She focuses on technical excellence within the air quality discipline. Her particular specialism is designing air quality opportunities, thus addressing any possible constraints when working in the early stages of projects in multidisciplinary teams. So Kathryn, hopefully you're there in the background and unmuted. I will mute myself and come off screen now. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can all hear me and you can see my screen, but shout if not. I'm here today to talk about Schrodinger's window. I decided this was a great title and that I'd really focus down on climate change into one of the areas we're already seeing this reflect our reports and our work. Hopefully you all know Schrodinger's law and you understand the implication, but we'll go through and flick through. Hopefully I'm talking to a room full of people that believe in climate change. But just to cover off, and hopefully you've all seen this graph from the IPCC before, we really are moving into a warming world. So one that's increased. We've got 16 of the 17 warmest years on record have occurred since 2001. We understand that we're exacerbating that anthropogenically with the release of CO2, and we are trying our hardest as a globe to stick below this 1.5 degree threshold. That won't be 1.5 degrees in each location, but across the globe as a whole. We're in this new geological time period called the Anthropocene, and we understand that we are the leading change occurring in the world today. What does that really mean for us as air quality specialists? Yes, we get it. Yes, we want to support, but what's really happening to everybody in the UK? What are we experiencing? What questions are we being asked by clients, tenants, people that have moved into the developments we're all working on? We've had our hottest temperatures on record this year. Climate change has definitely led to them, with them being 10 more times likely to have heat wave-like events like we've had this year. How many times this summer did you see it's the hottest day of the year so far, week on week, day on day? How many of us struggled working from home? How many of us definitely made the effort to go into the office to take advantage of the air conditioning? Now, unfortunately, that leads to health implications, and that has led to 2,800 excessive deaths in the over 65s during the 2022 heat wave so far. More numbers will be contributing to that, as obviously it's not just the over 65s that are affected, and we really did see extreme heat this summer. Our buildings are not necessarily designed for these temperature levels, and it's a question we're getting asked now more and more. How are we going to deal with overheating? How do we future-proof our designs for the year 2050, the year 2100? What do those concentrations and those temperatures look like? And what's the air quality answer inputting into those? So why Schrodinger's window? How many times have you been asked, can the windows open on your development? And you've given the answer from an air quality point of view. How many times has the EHO brought up that the acoustic report says something different? Or they're really not sure wind comfort means these windows can open on a 20, 30, 40, 50-story tower. It's coming up all the time that these reports don't reflect each other and are all requesting to their own guidance. What does that look like in reality? We're all working on these residential high-rise, not just residential use though, but anything. And we're always arguing between ourselves as different design leads about what the right option is. Do we want openable windows? Is that possible? Can we get it on some facades? A balcony is okay. Should we be acoustically treating the air that comes in with acoustic vents. But if we do that, there's no air quality control on that intake, and we're effectively offering natural ventilation at all times. Have we considered that when we've been modelling and reviewing the design and inputting into it? What influences the overheating design? So I mentioned a few earlier. So we've got our report that we submit to planning as air quality professionals or in the design stages. We're informed by Part F and the IAQM guidance that helps support us all. We've got acoustics who have their own regulations. We've got daylighting and solar gains. We've got security, we've got wind and microclimate, and then we've also got the value engineering aspect of all of this. The client wants the solution that's right for the scheme and that meets the cost requirements. We all have our own regulations, and we need to understand that we're all trying to get to the correct answer for the scheme based on the regulations we know and understand, and how we collaborate on this, approaching it in the right way in the right room over a workshop, understanding everybody's background is super beneficial to the scheme and the client and delivering the right end result for the project. So you need to be aware of these interconnections between different people influencing one design choice. Hopefully we write something like this, or to date we've been writing something like this. We might have exceedances of the objectives. We've been saying we're going to filter it as the primary ventilation. We've also been caveating that for short-term purge, it's okay, you can open the facade. Sometimes we don't get that through planning. Sometimes the AHO's response is no, if you're exceeding the objectives, seal the facade. I want a sealed facade, no openings. And then we look at something like acoustic vent, but that doesn't help with air quality. So we are then stuck with a fully sealed facade, and the only option for cooling is a boost function and an MVHR or active comfort cooling, which means more energy demand, more climate change implications. We need to be aware of this when we're inputting into these design options. To date, this work's probably been done, I'm going to argue now and be a bit risky, probably not thinking about the right objectives in mind. So we all do this. We put a report together for planning. We look at the annual means. We look at the number of hours. If we focus on NO2 here, we're looking at the number of hours in excess of 200 micrograms. Whether or not we get more than 18 exceedances a year determines whether or not we feel short-term concentrations are acceptable. But how do you determine short-term or purge ventilation? If you're a client pulling together these reports, you're seeing how many different reports define purge ventilation how differently. In the air quality world, in Part F, we tend to talk about removing high concentrations of pollutants, that purge ventilation is only to be used intermittently and only required for pollutants produced by occasional activities. Fumes, painting, we've all heard about burning your toast. You need to be able to get that pollution out. And maybe it's okay that we exceed the short-term objectives for that purpose because our concentrations would be so high internally. Therefore, we tend to use the short-term AQOs to determine suitability for purge or an opening facade. Overheating, in order to satisfy their requirements of O1 on providing an adequate means to remove excess heat from the indoor environment, this can be hundreds or thousands of hours a year. And we are both defining that as purge ventilation. So we're talking about a few hours or sub 18 hours, or probably more like a few hours a year where we're thinking a tenant may want to open a window. They're talking about hundreds or thousands of hours. And this is the clash that's happening between us defining different things. So do I really mean hundreds or thousands of hours? Yes. If we take Heathrow Airport as an example and we look at the past 5 years of meteorological data and temperature data, if we take the two trigger temperature points of 20 and 22 degrees C, how often do we see that exceeded in the data set? In 2018, you can see we had 1,460 hours where the temperature was in excess of 20 degrees C. These are the thresholds that are used to kind of understand whether or not an occupant would open a window. The practicality of this is once you've given a tenant an openable window, you are free to open it when you want. And that is the biggest conundrum to all of this. If we give a tenant an opening window, are they armed with enough information to know when that window should or shouldn't be opened? Which health criteria wins? Does the fact that you're thermally uncomfortable win? The fact that it's really loud outside? The fact that your security is not the best if that window is left open and you're at low level? The wind microclimate's not ideal and you end up with this whistling noise? The fact that the air pollution outside is really bad? How do you determine all that information as the end tenant? You're not going to sit and read planning reports. You need to know a really simplified information version of this and to make sure the design has reflected all of those specifics to move forward in a way that protects your health. We are talking about more than 10% of the year here in most instances. And then really, if we're talking about 10% of the year, is a short-term objective acceptable? Is comparing something we used to look at for 18 hours applicable to over 1,000 hours a year? If we look at this from just a pure monitoring point of view, we're all used to looking at air quality objectives as an annual mean or short-term mean, as I just discussed, but there is so much variation in the data, day by day, hour by hour, over the years. So we grabbed 5 years worth of data just to run some good statistics and make sure it's sound. And we were really looking at the variation that occurs across sites that correspond to this. How often in the summer are we seeing that pattern where actually we're really concerned that if the temperature was above 20 degrees and an occupant was to open their window, would they be exposed, and would that exposure shift their annual mean because they were exposed for that period of time? How could we look at that? There's no guidance telling you exactly what to do. Let's have a go. Let's see what we can pull together. Let's see how we can advise these clients properly. The variation in sites is drastic, and it's really key, therefore, that you find some information that supports your site application. Because of the need to look at it over a longer period of time, so on the 5-year metric, it's very hard to use site-specific. Site-specific data captured for 3 or 6 months may help you pinpoint which existing monitoring station with a big data set is most applicable to your site. But it's really about understanding how much variation is there. Even at a background site like Aldgate School, we still see really high peaks in the summertime. And is it therefore applicable that occupants could open their windows for those solutions? All right, this is a project example that you're all free to go and Google and figure out the name of, because it's in the public domain, but I'm not allowed to put the name on it. So apologies for that. It's a really obvious location with an obvious air quality constraint. We have poor air quality nearby. We have the Francis Crick Institute, which is a heavy laboratory facility. We are on top of St Pancras train station and the surrounding busy roads. We've got this argument going on, or active, passive cooling. So can we have opening windows? Can we not? Existing residential near there has opening windows, but we're being pushed towards a passive solution. Can we do that? Can we get comfort cooling in? Can we acoustically treat it? Can we filter it without an active pull through? There's this requirement to reduce the energy use. There's all this climate change policy pushing the sustainability person to reduce the energy demand of these buildings. And if we're saying in this instance, we need to up it, and we need to up it because the air quality constrains the option to passively cool this building, we need to be able to support that. So how did we go about this? We really looked at the sources and the times associated with these sources. So we have significant rail input nearby. We have Euston Road. We have the Francis Crick Institute that releases at really random times of day and could release whenever it wants to, and we need to be aware of that. A lot of localized pollution sources. So we need to be aware as air quality consultants what this means on an hourly basis over a year, over 5 years, rather than just thinking about a road source and trying to deliver an annual mean answer. How often could the windows be opened? We looked at a massive pool of 4 different kinds of monitoring locations to try and give the varying answers for the varying facades and the varying requirements that building may go through. So you can see from this that there are so many hours in the year where we can mitigate with an openable window, where air quality objectives on the annual mean requirement comply when the temperatures exceed. But no matter where, even Bloomsbury, so a really background location for London, we're still getting nearly 20% of the hours where we can't meet that. And therefore we ended up with a mixed solution. So how did we safeguard this? How did we design a system that can account for both these options? We decided that the windows would be openable, but we would also have comfort cooling, which would be automatically turned off. So it had a system in place where if a resident's window was open, the comfort cooling would stop. This would reduce any unintentional energy demand creation. The pollution concentrations would be monitored at the facade. So we have sensors embedded in the facade of the development, which will allow them to inform their residents, and they will receive an alert to tell them whether or not their windows can be opened. Those trigger criteria were quite difficult to set, will probably be under current flux, and will stabilise as and when the buildings finish being built, and we can inform via the process to get them to a set level where we're sure that the internal environments experienced are fine. Building management automate this alert on top of the text alert system to ensure that we could safeguard the occupants' health. So they'll be told to close their windows and to turn their comfort cooling on. This means that we can guarantee that occupants are protected from poor air quality and overheating. What are the benefits? So the project costs, the running costs come down. The installation cost is up, obviously, because we're now installing 2 systems, but the project running costs are coming down. The energy usage will be down because every option where you can open a window, you're going to receive a notification to do so rather than running a comfort cooling. The scheme is fully future-proofed, so it's future-proof for now and in the future. If we were ever to reduce our air quality objectives in the UK, we could set those as the new trigger levels for the system. Additionally, if temperatures really do rise in the UK and we get the high 45s, 50s, that could be an absolute worst case, then we have comfort cooling included for those when opening a window will simply not be enough. This project prioritises occupant health and comfort, not just health alone. That doesn't mean it was easy. There was a lot of to and fro with Camden Council to agree this approach on the development. Their number one job as an EHO is to make sure they're protecting the health of new residents. So you can understand why proposing a brand new system that's not been proven, that we can't justify, that we can't demonstrate an example of, is not ideal for them. It doesn't give them the confidence that the system worked. It took a lot of meetings, a lot of over explanation of how a management protocol could work, experience of other management protocols, although not specific to air quality, so that we could ensure that those occupants wouldn't be stuck between this decision, as the EHO put so succinctly. Would they be stuck between choosing being too hot or being exposed to poor air quality? And that's just not acceptable. This really is a challenging place to be, and I'm not pretending we've got all the answers. We are really stuck between this human-centric, planet-conscious debate. Are we making sure comfort, human health is number one? Are we going human-centric? We need to make sure these developments are really safe for the occupant and comfortable for the occupant. Or are we balancing this tightrope between that and planet-conscious design? So are we aware that installing all these comfort cooling is actually going to make our climate change situation worse and increase our energy demand? And is that the best thing for the planet? So we're balancing this tightrope, and we're really trying to come up with new solutions and new ways to interrogate and look at this data to see if we can get the right answers for projects. So here's my conclusions, and I caveated that with future thoughts because I don't think they're necessarily conclusions yet. We definitely do not have all the answers. There are rooms to develop brand new methodologies to consider things like this and to ensure we understand as best as possible using data we've got and predictions we've got to try and come up with answers. Don't be scared to start the conversation, ask questions, read other people's reports, be the reason that there's a workshop on overheating. Make sure your air quality concerns are kind of justified and explained properly to the whole design team, that it really is about supporting through REBA design stages. A lot of the time we pick up this work post-planning, so we've not been involved at the planning stage. We've had no control about what's been put in the planning reports, and we're picking up a REBA stage 3 or 4, and we're being asked to fix a design. Can we get this to work? Can we reduce the energy demand? Can we go to passive cooling instead? Air quality is a really key design situation here. Without this, a building can be unhealthy with an unsuitable overheating strategy. We really could be putting people in that place, like that EHO explained, of choosing between, am I really badly exposed to air pollution, or do I deal with my flat being too hot? What's the right answer? And remember the purpose. An assessment for planning is just that, and a REBA stage report for design and specification is for that. So we are informing the design and not necessarily informing the planning decision. So just be aware what you're inputting to, and that it can be more of a discussion in a workshop and a consideration. Thank you for listening, and hopefully that sparks some ideas, because that's all I'm aiming to achieve.
Thank you very much for that, Kathryn. That was yeah, a really interesting sort of real world example of the collisions of yeah. I liked your tightrope diagram. That was yeah, certainly where we've been caught between in the past. So we've had a couple of questions come through in the chat. So I will work through some of those now. Richard, you've been asked the question, if you could just explain the phrase lock-in emissions beyond 2020.
Yeah, I think that relates back to the comments on the sixth carbon budget from the Climate Change Committee. I suppose what I mean by that, and I think what they infer by that, is actually procurement contracts actually don't have the flexibility to be adjusted. So actually, let's say a bin collection contract that has specified a certain Euro standard without consideration of then improving on those Euro standards of vehicles means that actually the emissions associated with that Euro standard go throughout the entire contract. So it's sort of locking in poorer levels of emissions from the outset with very little in the way of influence to be able to modify those over the duration of the contract.
Okay, thanks for that. Hopefully, yeah, that explanation was understood. So this next question I'll jump to, I love the way it's phrased, so I shall read it out as it's written. So currently it is like the Wild West at committee decisions, where councillors often simply ignore climate reports and officers make their own judgment that any development that produces emissions cannot go ahead. What can the IAQM do to change this? So Richard, I'd be interested in your take on that, and then Kathryn afterwards as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I suppose actually, I think part of the Wild West approach is actually the mere fact that actually there isn't coherent guidance around what climate change impacts mean from a local authority planning decision perspective, which is partly sort of what I was straying into in my presentation. I think if we can get some agreed parameters around that, then I think actually that moves something more towards a evidence-based and objective decision-making made by planning authorities rather than sort of maybe the reference to the Wild West made by the person submitting the question.
Okay, thank you for that. And Kathryn, did you have a comment on that one?
I do definitely share the pain of thinking you're the only competent person in the room that's read all the reports. But I do think a lot of it is about helping them in a more meaningful way to understand all the information they're being provided with. I think a meeting talking about multiple reports with multiple EHOs is becoming more of the norm and something we're requesting so that we can cover off a multitude of issues in one go, although they're all focused on climate change. So I definitely think that helps. And just really dumbing it down, like we all write a really dumbed down NTS for an EIA. Let's all write a really dumbed down NTS at the start of our air quality assessments for planning, and equally the climate change section. So we really can make this understandable to not just the planning authority officers or the EHOs, but actually the committee members that are going to get to decide these applications.
Okay, is there, do you think there's anything I guess coming out of the climate change working group, there will probably be some sort of document of the IAQM's position statement. Is there anything you'd like to see? Are those sort of the aspects you'd like to see the IAQM sort of making clear? Make it clear for the reader, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and about kind of purge. I think I would love some more definitions on purge and some more definitions of like suitability of the objectives when we're talking about those kind of timeframes. Should we be classifying a trigger level as the IAQM rather than each specialist coming up with different trigger levels, like the overheating have for temperatures they're set at 20 and 22 degrees? Do we need to come up with a halfway house of 45, 43 micrograms? What's the microgram point at what percentage of the year are you going to trip your air quality objective in general? So yeah, I think there's definitely some clarity to come out of the industry, but maybe it's going to take quite a big conversation with a lot of different people of their experience to date of weird projects like this, because they don't come up all the time, so that we can kind of reach what those are and do some clever maths to kind of figure out what those trigger levels could be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, this is the start of those conversations.
Yeah.
So I will move on to the next question. So extent permissions are often worse regarding greenhouse gas emissions than new developments, but new developments still release emissions. Should extant permissions be accounted for? Richard, I'll pass that one to you if that's okay.
I think if I understand what extant permissions are, I think that's existing buildings. So I think you know, there are some challenges about retrofitting existing buildings and making them more efficient, energy efficient, and also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. Obviously, the embodied carbon of existing buildings is already there. So actually, I suppose part of the footprint of increased greenhouse gas emissions is very much associated with modifications or new materials and where the carbon is generated as a consequence of those materials being shaped, formed and transported. So I get the point, but I do think that actually there's quite a lot that we still need to do with our historic existing buildings, not necessarily with materials, but energy efficiency, which obviously does have some implications with the materials that are then used.
Okay, thank you for that. Kathryn, would you like to provide a comment on that one, or shall I press on with other questions? Yes, I think that was a shake and then a nod, so I'll go with that. Okay. So then moving, this is a nice question. How might these tensions between air quality and climate change relate to questions of environmental justice? Will any co-benefits be felt by all? So I know the one output of the climate change working group so far was a comment piece about that was titled "Air Quality and Climate Change: How Can We All Win?" So that's quite a positive way of looking at it. So yeah, can the benefits be felt by all? Kathryn, I enjoyed your tightrope, so I'm going to pass this over to you first, if that's okay.
There's definitely some really easy wins. I think even in my just short of 10-year career trajectory, we've gone from modelling CHPs on every resi job going to all electric air source heat pumps. So being pushed down this carbon negative strategy is beneficial for air quality in some ways. Additionally, even with transport measures, we're really being pushed to zero parking or all EV parking, which obviously does have some implications for air quality, and how we generate that electricity is another matter with everything that's going on politically right now. But as far as actual real life on the ground, there are cross benefits coming in from the two interlinking. It's really kind of up to us to kind of force our way forward with how we make those interactions more overstated for the client and for the project. We've seen a lot of increase in green infrastructure, and that obviously has benefits for the heat urban island effect and air quality if we can be in the room and influence the species that are selected. So sometimes we manage to get that chance, other times we don't. Sometimes they specify trees that are worse for air quality and you rip that up at stage 4 and suggest they plant something else. So it's really about getting those chances to spark those connections between the disciplines to go, look, actually we've got a chance here of getting a double win, let's get it, or a triple win or a quadruple win. Like, let's get this cross-pollination of ideas working as much as possible. The same with, we're trying to prove via this really weird methodology we've made up when we could use passive cooling, when we can open the windows and really reduce that energy demand. A client wants a building that's not only cheap to run but is good for the occupant at the end of the day. So if we can prove that, okay, the air quality objective might be exceeded, but actually summer data looks reasonable, we really feel that they couldn't be exposed over X percentage of the year, then does that mean a passive solution's then viable? And then you've not only avoided the carbon from running this really energy intensive plant, but you've also reduced the built-in carbon by installing more plant your building didn't need. Can we go back to natural ventilation on more developments and lose the MVHR? There's a lot of options out there, and it's about us informing ourselves of other people's and how we kind of cross over to issue that kind of shared benefit.
Okay, thank you for that. That's definitely a positive. I like the idea of quadruple wins. That's good. I'll bring you in there.
I don't have much to add really. I think, you know, social justice is very much sort of at the forefront of everything we try to do now. And actually, maybe sort of, you know, over my 25-year career as an air quality professional, in the last 10 years, I've seen it more evident than I ever have. I think we just have to, as air quality professionals, have social justice at the forefront of our mind to make sure that we're getting the win-wins out.
Okay, thank you for that. So just a quick one now that's possibly more of an air quality question, but we'll ask it anyway. So would biophilic design concepts improve air quality within the building? I think that's to you directly, Kathryn.
That's cool. The one thing to remember, because we've reviewed it loads, you need a lot of lux to get the biophilic benefit, which is a lot of energy, not just a bit. And you have to be prepared to understand the energy buy-off of that. You need a really high lux environment to deliver the quoted concentrations. So you need to be aware, if you're talking about internal biophilia, the offset of the energy you need to get those plants at that lux level where they can deliver that internal benefit. Different to green infrastructure externally, much more pro that. Doesn't require the lux levels or the input of energy to get the same answer. So yeah, just be aware of the trade-off between, yes, it looks great, yes, it makes people feel better, yes, it does have some air quality benefit, but only at a really high energy intensive level with a really high lux level. So be aware of that trade-off.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So this next question includes a compliment, which has drawn me to it, so I'll take that. So I think the two presentations worked really well together. Thank you very much. The interaction of air quality and climate change in terms of emissions and also in terms of climate change impacting our exposure to air pollution. So thanks for that. And then the question is, do you think it's time to model future air quality using data from climate projections? Kathryn, you're nodding a little bit, so I'm going to go to you first, if that's all right.
I'm quite a big advocate that we need to really look at what we're currently modelling and the way we're currently modelling. We have some open conversations with some universities about particulate emissions from electric vehicles with this shifting future emission look at. Am I influencing the design the correct way currently? Do I have enough to influence the design the correct way currently, especially with our shift towards World Health objectives? I completely get people's point of this idea that air quality is disappearing. You get this general sense from a client, oh no, well, you're fine. You meet the objectives most of the UK now, right? My project's not in London, I'll be fine. And then you go, okay, but you want well, so you need to comply with the World Health. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. So it's not done, it's not gone away. So if we are moving to this position where 40 micrograms is no longer the limit and we want to hit 30, 10, next to nothing in the case of PM, how do we achieve that when we're also going to be increasing our local emissions of particulates via EV vehicles? Do we have enough data to give someone the right answer right now? I'm not sure we do. I think there's enough data out there being collected by different unis to start looking at it. I'm sure you two know a bit more than me about what DEFRA are up to and collating to support air quality professionals in that. But yeah, I think it's something that needs to be looked at on another level, and we should be probably modelling the future, because the future's not that far away now. 8 years' time, we'll only be selling electric or hybrid vehicles. So we really need to be modelling this future, and does that future need to coincide with a future temperature? So yeah, I think yes, I agree. We need some more future data.
Yeah, I think for me, there's again, bringing it back to sort of my own experiences, there is amusement in that when I started my career and was looking at all the DEFRA tools, and the horizon year seemed so far away, and now the horizon year doesn't seem so far away. It makes me think, yeah, we do. There does need to be some extensions around that, and yeah, there'll be a point where we joke about. Do you remember when 2030 was the horizon year? But let's not get there yet. There's still a few years to go. So Richard, do you have any sort of comment on that one specifically, I guess?
I suppose just to add, actually, we're very much driven by what the statute says at the moment. And actually, obviously, under the Environment Act 2021, DEFRA are obliged to set targets for PM 2.5 on the 31st of October. So I suppose there's potentially a change in metric that will drive future assessments going forward. I agree with Kathryn in terms of what she said with regards to the future sort of emissions profile that is going to change, particularly with the rollout of EVs and widespread adoption of EVs. it's accepted that tailpipe emissions become insignificant, but actually sort of abrasion, tyre wear, brake wear, etc., starts to come to the fore. Equally, as we deal with transport issues, then domestic emissions start to sort of take more of a dominant effect. So there is a changing landscape on our emissions profile, which as air quality professionals, we probably need to be looking at whether we've got the right assessment tools to fully encapsulate everything that's changing.
Yep, I agree. And, you know, there's obviously challenges there, but for me, that is, you know, it's an exciting time to be in the industry, in that as much as it's nice to have reports that we know how to do, the more fun and the challenging stuff is where we can let our inner scientists come out, I think. So, so from that sort of side, I think, you know, it's an interesting time to be here. It's also nice to know that you do have a career that's ongoing. So we don't want to solve as much as we do want to solve the air quality problems we've got today, there will be more coming, but hopefully that means that we've still got interesting careers. So I think we may be out of time, but thanks ever so much for all the questions. I'll hand back to Ethny now and let you close out, Ethny.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much to you, Jamie, for chairing today's session, and to our speakers, Richard and Kathryn. Some really rich discussion there, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions. We've had loads through today. So thank you all to the attendees for coming and being so engaged. I hope you found that as helpful and informative as I did. And just to let you know that the next IES webinars, there's one tomorrow on an introduction to contaminated land investigation and remediation. And then the day after, we have another one on how the net zero target can be supported by strategic environmental assessment. And both of these can be registered for on the IES website. So thanks once again to all our speakers and to you, Jamie. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, all.